and we'll get started. My name is Paula Scott. I'm, of course, a parishioner here. I'm also an artist. Get the next slide. Okay, one more. Now I need my glasses. Okay. When I was a teenager, Gavin Dawes published a life story on Damien called The Holy Man. That was in 1973. Now you can do the math. It was the first publication that I had seen about Damien's life. And when I read this book, I wept because it made me realize the extent of this man's compassion and how far he was willing to go in order to make a difference in the lives of the people that were banished and abandoned to Kalawao on the Kalaupapa peninsula. Most people in Hawaii and even Molokai know very little about this man's remarkable life, let alone the rest of the world. In 2009, I was still living in New Mexico and was invited to participate in a group show that opened on September 9, 2009. There were 9 artists participating in this show, and each created 9 pieces of art that were 9 by 9 in size. In thinking about what the content would be for these 9 pieces, I thought that a series on Damien and his life would be relevant since his canonization was only a month away from the exhibition date. Next. Having grown up on Molokai and living just above the Kalaupapa peninsula that the lepers were banished to back in Damien's day, I felt compelled to honor this man's life work. This is my neighborhood. There's Kalaupapa, really close. The connection I had for Damien was very strong. So I created 9 pieces of art that commemorates his lifespan using existing photographs. My approach was to use the images that many of us were already familiar with when you look at all the books on Damien, because they're all about the same, and give them my own twist. But the body of work was intended to educate people, so it was a visual outline of his life's work at the Kalaupapa Peninsula. And I wanted the viewer to have more knowledge and a greater sense of the enormity of his work. So Damien was born in rural Belgium on January 3rd, 1840. So having this presentation today is very timely because next week is his birthday. His name was Joseph de Veuster. He was the youngest of 7 children. When his oldest brother Pamphile entered the congregation of the Sacred Hearts of Jesus and Mary, Joseph, at the age of 13, quit going to school since his help was needed on the family farm full-time. He helped his family until he was old enough to enter the congregation of the Sacred Hearts of Jesus and Mary, following his older brother, Pamphile's footsteps, and his 2 sisters who took religious vows. There he took the name Damien after a 6th century martyr. Did you know that the 6th century martyr, Saint Damien, and his twin brother Cosmas are the patron saints of medicine? How many knew that? 2. That's pretty good, actually. In October 1863, his older brother Pamphile was given orders to leave for the mission in the Hawaiian Islands. He became too ill to make the voyage, and Damien seized this opportunity and obtained permission from the Superior General to take his brother's place. Okay. So this is one of the pieces of the art. So where were you when you were 23 years old? What were you doing, except for Brody? So many of us, even when we reach the age of 30, we're not sure of what we want to do with our lives. Many of us wait for that crystallized moment in time, hoping to finally figure out why we were put on this planet to begin with. For many of us, that moment never comes with any kind of conviction or clarity, and we spend most of our lives stumbling through it with a certain degree of uncertainty. Most of us, how many of us, labor over the trivial things such as deciding what to order off on a menu, or what to wear that day. In this day and age, this is my opinion, people can commit to a tattoo more readily than they can to a vocation. So they boarded a ship, R.W. Wood, on October 30, 1863, at Port Bremen in Germany, and was scheduled to set sail on November 2nd. Now, I'm going to go into the voyage part because to me it's really interesting, so I hope you find it interesting too. However, the winds were contrary, as Damien wrote, and they did not leave the area until November 11th. It took them nearly a whole month to get through the English Channel due to those winds. Damien writes, "Continuously we had to tack now from southeast to northwest, from northeast to southwest. But having worked at it for 2 days, we scarcely made 1 degree, which is 20 leagues, which is about 69 miles. Think about this. The English Channel itself is 350 miles. Wow, getting nowhere slowly. On board the ship were 6 missionaries, Damien being one of them, and 10 nuns. That was it on that ship. Finally, on December 21st, they passed the equator. On January 21, they passed through Le Maire Strait and approached the much-feared Cape Horn. Cape Horn has long been known as a sailor's graveyard due to the strong winds and currents, large waves, and icebergs. These winds are intensified at the Horn because of the funneling effect of the Andes Mountains and the Antarctic Peninsula that force the winds into the relatively narrow Drake Passage. In a letter to his brother Pamphile, he describes that upon passing through the Le Maire Strait, they had a bit of good weather for 2 days as they hugged the coast of South America. If the weather had kept up for 2 more days, they would have been in the Pacific Ocean and out of danger. As luck would have it, just as they approached the Pacific Ocean, they encountered what Damien describes as impetuous but contrary wind that put them 200 leagues, that's 600 miles, further south than they needed to be. That's not a good place to be off course. The ship was tossed from side to side for the next 10 days without making 1 step further. On February 2nd, a northwest wind turned and blew in the opposite direction. Okay, you think, okay, they're out of it now. Not so. They encountered a frightful storm on February 5th. The wind blew with such force that it caused them to make 3.5 leagues an hour, which is 12 miles an hour. They were mountains of water of an unbelievable height, which came crashing down one on the other. Damien wrote how each big wave, on passing the right side of the ship, let out a terrible roar like the blast of a cannon gun. At that same instant, the ship was entirely inclined on its left side, and in an instant, with the wave leaving an abyss in its wake, the ship redressed itself by lunging onto its right side, almost fully underwater. After that storm, they had nothing but good weather. On March 19, 1864, 140 days after he left Belgium, Damien arrived in Honolulu. He celebrated a birthday during that journey. That's 5 long months of an ocean voyage. Wrote Damien, "It is impossible to describe the happiness we felt then. The disembarkment of the European missionaries, and especially the 10 sisters dressed in white, made a great impression on the people who assembled at all sides. They were taken to the Cathedral of Our Lady of Peace and celebrated a Mass of Thanksgiving for a successful voyage." This is a very old picture of the cathedral. It looks very different today. He was ordained a priest in May 1864, just 2 months after his arrival. From there, Damien was assigned to work in Puna on the Big Island for a total of 6 months. In February of 1865, he arrived in Kohala to begin his new assignment with an area of more than 1,000 square miles. Kohala and Hamakua was the largest of 5 Catholic missions established on the Big Island. It was quite a trek. I mean, some of the treks he did by foot, some he did by horse. So, you know, he was always like trying to get to the next place so that he could have Mass, try and get more people baptized, things of that sort. So, and at 33 years of age, Damien had been on the Big Island for nearly 10 years since his arrival in Hawaii. He accomplished a lot in that time he was there. On May 4th, 1873, Damien traveled to Maui to attend a dedication of a new church St. Anthony's in Wailuku. Again, it doesn't look like this anymore because they redid it, I think, in the 80s. After the dedication, the bishop gathered 4 young priests as he was looking for several priests to volunteer going to the leper colony on Molokai. The thought was that he would recruit several priests and they would be there on a rotational basis. Damien was the only one who volunteered, and soon he and the bishop sailed over to the Kalaupapa Peninsula. He arrived there on May 10th, 1873, with just the clothes on his back, his holy cross, and a breviary, which is a prayer book. That was it. What was supposed to be a few months there became his station for the rest of his life. Okay, so May 10th he arrived there, right? Here's a letter that he wrote May 12th, 1873, to Father Modeste Favens, Sacred Hearts. Dear Reverend Father, I am sending you these words by way of the schooner Warwick, which is a ship that the Department of Health used to get supplies back and forth to Kalaupapa, to let you know that from now on that there should be a resident priest at this post. The sick arrive by boatloads and some die as a consequence. I am living under a pandanus tree while waiting for the lumber to build a house such as you would consider appropriate. Send me a case of wine, some spiritual books and others for studying, some shirts, trousers, rosaries, bell, shoes, catechisms, altar bread, small and large, a bag of flour, and a lockbox. Please write to Reverend Father Gulston to have him take charge of Kohala until my return there, unless you find one of the Kona fathers to take charge permanently. You know my intention. I wish to sacrifice myself for the poor lepers. The harvest here is ripe. Pray and have prayers said for me and for all of us. Totally yours, Brother Damien. So that's kind of like the ships that would go back and forth to Kalaupapa on a pretty frequent basis, judging from the letters that he wrote. One of the skills Damien acquired as a young lad was carpentry. As a young man, he had a lot of energy, and he acquired his carpentry skills while working on the family farm. I often wonder if he had any idea that he would use these skills to the extent that he did later on in life. The bottom image in this painting is a photo taken about 3 years after he got there. The 3 buildings above it is the St. Philomena Church. So you can see the first version, the second version, and the third version. It was built the year before he got there, and after Damien arrived in 1873, he added on, which is the next one, and then again later on. Those that suffer from leprosy in advanced stages suffer paralysis and crippling of hands and feet, shortening of toes and fingers due to reabsorption, chronic non-healing ulcers on the bottom of their feet, blindness, loss of eyebrows, nose disfigurement. Death came almost daily. Those that had died had been buried in shallow graves because if you're sick, how are you going to bury somebody else? And the soil down there is not really soil, it's just a lot of lava. Damien was horrified to witness the wild pigs coming along and uprooting these shallow graves. In the first 6 years he was there, Damien dug most of the graves and built most of the coffins for 1,600 people. He built over 300 homes and structures in the 16 years that he was there. God, when you think about what we do in 6 years. This is a 1922 picture of Kalawao. So if you can imagine Kalawao when Damien got there without these buildings. So it's on the other side of the Kalaupapa Peninsula. And a lot of times when people were dropped off there, they were just dropped off on a rocky shoreline. And that's why some of them would die, because they could never make it to shore. It was pretty cruel. The first settlement was established on the east side of the Kalaupapa Peninsula, North Shore, Molokai, which is Kalawao, which is located at the foot of the sea cliffs. The first group arrived at Kalawao on January 6, 1866. Fear and ignorance can easily separate us from our sense of humanity. Leprosy was spreading at an epidemic rate in Hawaii. The Board of Health was the agency responsible for making decisions as to how to handle this rapidly spreading epidemic. The solution to anyone diagnosed with the disease was to have them examined at the Kalihi receiving station, and once diagnosed, they would send them off to the Kalaupapa Peninsula. This included children. Hawaiians referred to this illness as a separating sickness. The text that is in this image: my father came to take me home from school, but instead of taking me to the Kalihi receiving station immediately like the principal said they should, my parents took me home. The whole family cried, including my father. The next day, my father took me downtown and bought me a new suit. It was my first suit of clothes. They were so nice. I looked good. I had never had clothes like that before because we were poor. So I wore that suit of clothes to the Kalihi receiving station. Even though we were poor, my father said he wanted me to be dressed nicely when I was taken to Kalihi to be declared a leper. They took my picture for the official record of the Board of Health wearing that new suit of clothes. When the picture was taken, my father broke down again and cried. I still can't get through this without getting emotional. So I became a leper. This young boy was only 6 years old. The youngest child sent there on record was 4 years old. Astounding. And there's no one there to receive them. There's no one to be in charge of them, to take care of them, to feed them. They were left on their own with the adults. So this image includes a lauhala, which is also known as a pandanus, or screw pine tree, which we showed earlier. It was the only shelter that Damien had the first few weeks at the peninsula, and he slept under it at night. The children that were sent to the Kalaupapa Peninsula were separated and taken from their families with no provisions made for their arrival or care, like I had said. They were young and vulnerable and fell prey to the older and stronger adults there. Not long after he arrived, Damien strove for law and order and essentially became the parent and guardian to these exiled children. I can't even begin to imagine how a parent would have felt having their child taken from them and banished to the peninsula, let alone how the child would have felt. So as you see from the earlier images of Kalaupapa Peninsula and the sea cliffs, it is perfect for isolation. The seas are rough, so you can't even get there that easily. The cliff is a 1,600-foot cliff, and the trail is, even today, a tough trail to tackle. Anyway, later on, he formed a girls' choir, which became very popular with the residents there. And when we say residents of Kalaupapa, we're talking about those that have leprosy and were sent there. And over time, he built a home for the boys and a home for the girls, giving them the shelter and protection that they needed. The tree symbolizes the shelter he brought to the children in so many ways. If you were to write a job description for all that Damien did, somewhere near or at the top of the list, in my opinion, would be advocate. Other descriptions, if you wanted somebody to fill his shoes, would be carpenter, manager, administrator, farmer, communicator, healer, healthcare practitioner, superintendent, counselor, teacher, choir master, researcher, and of course, priest. He wrote numerous letters fervently and often. In the book, Father Damien's Letters, just this one, There is a record of 352 letters written. He wrote to the Board of Health, he wrote to his superiors in the diocese, he wrote to the Queen, he wrote to his parents, his brother Pamphile. Some of his letters eventually made enough of a difference to nudge the powers that be. For 16 years, he repeatedly asked to have some sisters sent to help care for the afflicted residents and also to help him look after the children. The sisters did not arrive at Kalaupapa until November 1888, even though they had been in Hawaii for 5 years. In addition to all the things he asked for in his letter writing was supplies to build with. And because of this activism and letter writing campaigns, and a lot of the letters too were for supplies, things of that sort, he did raise a level of awareness to the public. Many from around the world were moved by his work and dedication. Some would send him money, and before any authorities could tell him what to do with it, he would buy clothes and shoes for the children there, or food, or building supplies. I guess we should add accountant to that, huh? To that list? Didn't think about that. Did you know that Damien had command of 5 languages? Yeah, he did. He spoke Flemish, French, Latin, English, and Hawaiian. He studied the Hawaiian language for those 2 months before he was ordained. His correspondence with his religious order was in French, and he developed his linguistic talent in English, which took on increasing importance as he regularly interacted with government officials and his admirers. Many of his letters were seasoned with Latin phrases and Hawaiian. Did you also know that Damien was awarded the Royal Order of Kamehameha I, which is an order of knighthood bestowed upon him in October 1881 by Queen Liliuokalani? How many knew that? Nobody. There was only like 94 total that was ever awarded. So it was a pretty honorable thing to be bestowed upon him. The image that I used here was done by an artist named Edward Clifford, who traveled from England in December of 1888 to pay his last respects to the dying priest. This image is a painting, and he created it within 6 months of Damien's death. However, the artist chose to leave out all signs of leprosy. Now, it's a mixed media piece that I had done, so behind the image is one of the many letters that Damien wrote. I call this image the healer because on a daily basis, Damien cleaned and changed the bandages of lepers. He was horrified that the residents were left of their own with no personnel to give medicine and to keep the gaping wounds clean and bandaged. Some patients would have large chunks of their sides or limbs or digits rotted away, and it would be full of maggots and infection. Because one of the things about the disease is that you lose sensation of feeling. So they don't know. They don't feel any different. It was one of the reasons why he smoked a pipe, in order to mask the smell of rotting flesh. Damien had tobacco seeds brought to Kalaupapa so that he could plant and grow his own tobacco. Many a time, he wrote, as he recalled these first days, in fulfilling my priestly duties at the leper's home, I had been obliged not only to close my nostrils, but to remain outside to breathe fresh air. To counteract the bad smell, I got myself accustomed to the use of tobacco. The smell of the pipe preserved me somewhat from carrying in my clothes the obnoxious odor of our lepers. Daily he strove not only to heal their wounds, but their spirits. And this is one of the pieces that I have up here, and it's a very dimensional piece. I knew I did a good job on it when some teenage boys looked at it and did that. I said, all right, got it. So this is the culprit. It's a bacterium called Mycobacterium leprae. By 1884, just 11 years after his arrival to the peninsula, Father Damien was diagnosed with leprosy. It was then that he addressed the residents there as, "We, the lepers." The disease of leprosy also affects the nerve endings to the areas of afflictions, like I had just mentioned. There's no physical pain that can be sensed in the areas of the disease. Now, this particular image was taken when he was near death. And the photo I used to create this mixed media piece was taken by Dr. Sidney Swift, who also felt that it was important to document this man's death. Shortly before Damien's death, the doctor arrived at the priest's rectory with a box full of glass plates and a camera mounted on a tripod. The image that surrounds Damien in this is the image of the leprosy bacteria. So this photo of Father Damien here was pictured within 2 weeks of his death by William Brigham. I think he was one of the first directors of Bishop Museum on Oahu. Father Damien's right arm is in a sling made by Mother Marianne with a red silk scarf, because it really hurt his arm. He still had enough nerves to feel that it really hurt to have his arm hanging, so she put it in a sling for him. Damien was 49 years old when he died, April 15th, 1889, at Kalawao with Mother Marianne at his bedside. Shortly before his death, he wrote his brother Pamphile, "I am gently going to my grave. It is the will of God. And I thank him very much for letting me die of the same disease and in the same way as my lepers." Now, I'm going to read an excerpt from this book, if you don't mind. It was too long for me to transpose. It's a report written by Father Wendelin Mollers, Sacred Hearts, on the final days of Father Damien. And this report was written April 17, 1889, but he backtracks in this report. Saturday, March 23rd, he was still, as usual, active, coming and going. It was the last time I saw him like that. Since March 28th, he had not left his room. That day, he arranged his temporal affairs. After signing his papers, he said to me, "I am happy to leave all to the bishop. Now I die poor, and I have nothing more for myself." Thursday, March 28th, he began to stay in bed. Saturday the 30th, he made his preparation to die. It was truly edifying to see. He appeared so happy. When I heard his general confession, I confessed to him, then together we renewed our vows, which bind us to the congregation. On the following day, he received Holy Viaticum. Throughout the day, he was happy and jovial as usual. "Look at my hands," he said. "All the wounds are closed. The scabs are turning black. It's a sign of death, you know. Look at my eyes. I have seen so many lepers die. I make no mistake, death is not far off. I would have liked very much to see the bishop one more time, but the good God calls me to celebrate Easter with him. May God be blessed." He thought of nothing else but to prepare for death. There was no mistaking it. One was seeing death approaching. April 2nd, he received extreme unction from the hands of Father Conradi. "God is good to me," he said during the course of the day, "to have kept me long enough to have 2 priests at my side to assist me in my final moments, and then to know that the good sisters of charity are at the leprosarium. Right there is my Latin, Nunc Dimittis." I don't know if I'm saying that correctly. Leprosy work is assured. I am no longer necessary. So in a little while, I will go above there myself. "When you are above, Father," I said to him, "do not forget those whom you leave orphaned." "Oh, no," he replied. "If I have any credit before God, I will intercede for all those who find themselves in the leprosarium." I asked him to leave me his mantle, as did Elijah, to have his big heart. "Oh, what would you do with it?" he said to me. "It is full of leprosy." I asked then for his blessing. He gave it to me, his eyes filled with tears. He blessed also the brave daughters of St. Francis for whose coming he had prayed so much. The following days, the good father found himself better. We even had a bit of hope that he might hold on for some more time. The good sisters came to visit him often. What I admired above all in him was his admirable patience. He was so ardent, so fit, so strong, to be so nailed to his poor pallet without ever much to suffer. He was lying on the floor on a straw mattress as the most simple and poorest of the lepers, and we had a hard time to get him to accept a bed. In what poverty! He who has given out so much money to the assuage of the lepers, he forgot self to the point of having no linen for himself or to change his bed. His attachment to the congregation was admirable. How often he said to me, "Father, you represent the congregation for me here. Not so? Let us say together the prayers of the congregation." How sweet to die a child of the Sacred Hearts. He charged me many times to write to the Superior General to tell him that his sweetest consolation at that moment was to die a member of the Congregation of the Sacred Hearts. Sunday, April 13th, he was worse, and all hope of holding on to him vanished. 1 minute after midnight, he received the good God for the last time. He would soon see him face to face. From time to time, he lost consciousness. When I went to see him, he recognized me. He talked, and we bid each other goodbye, for I had to go to Kalaupapa on the next day, Sunday. On that morrow, after my duties, I returned. I found him strong, but his ideas were no longer clear. I read in his eyes resignation, joy, satisfaction, but his lips could no longer say what was in his heart. From time to time, he would hold my hand feelingly. Monday, April 15th, I received a note from Father Conradi telling me that Father was in agony. I hurried to be there with him, but on the way, another courier came to announce his death. He died without effort, as if he were going to sleep. He faded away so softly after spending nearly 16 years amidst the horror of leprosy. The good pastor had given his life for the sheep. When I arrived, he was already vested in his soutane. All the marks of leprosy had disappeared from his figures. The wounds of his hands were all dried. Towards 11 o'clock, we carried him to the church, where he remained in state until 8 o'clock. The next day, surrounded by lepers who were praying for their respected father. In the afternoon of Monday, the good sisters came to dress the coffin. They covered the interior with white silk, and they redid the outside with black cloth and a white cross. On the next day, April 16th, I celebrated Holy Mass for my dear confrere. After Mass, the funeral got underway. We passed in front of the new church to go to the cemetery. The cross led the procession, then came the musicians and the members of an association, and then the sisters, the women and the girls. Then came the coffin, carried by 8 white lepers after the coffin. After the coffin walked the officiating priest, accompanied by Father Conradi and the acolytes, and followed by the brothers with their boys and men. Father Damien has begun his life on Molokai in the greatest destitution, to the point of being obliged to pass his first nights there under a big tree. True to his desire to be buried under the same tree, a pandanus, during his illness, I had a grave prepared at the place indicated. It is there that his body rests, awaiting the glorious resurrection. He is turned toward the altar. The grave is closed by a deep bed of cement. There concealed are the precious remains of the good Father Damien, whom everyone rightly calls the hero of charity. Molokai, April 17, 1889, Father Wendelin, Sacred Hearts. That concludes my presentation. Any questions, discussion? Yes, John.